Hello and welcome to video number 8 in the series of 10 produced for the Reveal project. In this video, we're going to focus on some of the contemporary ethical concerns in library provision. Now, the Reveal project stands for Reinforcing Ethics and Values for Effective Advocacy for Libraries. The project was funded by CILIPS Research Fund to enhance collective advocacy across the profession through an accessible framework for library and information ethics and values, presented as a set of continuing professional development tools. And these videos form part of the resources produced for the project. As I stated, this video is video number 8 in the series of 10, and it will focus on some of the contemporary ethical issues that haven't really been covered to date. So we'll consider issues like equality, diversity and inclusion in a broader sense. We'll also discuss neutrality as it applies within libraries, sustainability issues, as well as well-being and the behavioural aspects of that in libraries. Now, beginning with equality, diversity and inclusion. In a 2005 article, Ragnar Audunsen says, regardless of sector, libraries can serve a significant purpose for the communities they serve by being a space where people from different walks of life and cultural backgrounds can gather to interact and engage with ideas, take part in social and cultural events, and open their world to new insights. So the library as a multicultural meeting space, which is essentially what the article was about, is actually something that can be a major policy focus. And obviously in doing so, we need to be mindful of equality, diversity and inclusion. Now, an increasing public focus on equality and diversity have led to professional bodies reflecting on their codes of ethics to ensure that they are representative of equalities issues. We've highlighted the new ethical framework introduced by CILIP in video 3, which sought to place human rights, equality and diversity more explicitly as a cornerstone of the values of the profession. The American Library Association's addition of a 9th principle in 2021 to their Code of Ethics related to racial and social justice, and this was an important output from the Social and Racial Justice subgroup of the Committee on Professional Ethics. And this ninth principle reads, "We affirm the inherent dignity and rights of every person. We work to recognise and dismantle systemic and individual biases, to confront inequity and oppression, to enhance diversity and inclusion, and to advance racial and social justice in our libraries, communities, profession, and associations through awareness, advocacy, education, collaboration, services, and allocation of resources and spaces." And that was produced in 2021. Now, this 9th principle is very clearly a significant statement in terms of equality and diversity. It's arguable that ethical codes previous to this did pay some lip service to these concepts through ethical policies such as equity of access. But this much clearer definition around equality and diversity really does place this as a cornerstone of ethics for the ALA. Now, we can see an even clearer impact of equality and diversity issues within specific library policies themselves. So on the one hand, we have CILIP and ALA basically targeting their codes of ethics to be much more inclusive. But in terms of the practice aspects of this, the Suffolk Library policy around equality and diversity gives us a good idea of how this is thought. Suffolk Libraries aims to enrich everyone's quality of life. To do this, equality and inclusion must be at the heart of all we do. We create safe, welcoming spaces for everyone in our communities, regardless of age, gender, race, socioeconomic background or beliefs. Libraries can play a part in fostering strong and cohesive communities by promoting understanding, trust and respect. Libraries facilitate this through running events and activities, providing relevant content and information, and giving different people the chance to meet and come together. So again, in this statement you can see reflected some of the issues that we saw in the quote from Audunsen's article around multicultural meeting spaces. But we also see the focus that we have seen earlier in CILIP's ethical framework, and also ALA's 9th principle that's been added to the codes of ethics. This idea that inclusion involves a range of different aspects, things like age, gender, race, as well as socioeconomic background and belief, and that libraries are there for everyone and should be focused on serving everyone. So again, this is probably the main practical area where you'll see such policies being implemented. This enhancement essentially of the mission statement of the library service itself. Now, an important influence on equalities in the UK was the Equality Act 2010. In dealing with legal issues around equality and diversity, this legislation has been extremely important, and it highlights the importance of ensuring organisations consider equality when providing their services. And this is known as the Equality Duty. And the Equality Duty is a duty on public bodies and others carrying out public functions. It ensures that public bodies consider the needs of all individuals in their day-to-day work, in shaping policy, in delivering services, and in relation to their own employees. Now, at the heart of the Equality Act is a set of protected characteristics. So public bodies must be mindful of these characteristics, which are disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, and sexual orientation. And in doing so, they must be mindful of both direct and indirect discrimination. The latter relate to when a policy that is introduced may impact a group disproportionately. The government guidance on this provides an example. They say, when reviewing the services it provides, a public transport service provider finds that Sunday services are often used by people going to religious services. Reducing the Sunday service would therefore affect the ability of people belonging to certain religious groups to attend those services. The transport service provider considers this evidence along with any other relevant factors, such as the cost of providing the service, when arriving at its conclusions following the review. So any reviews related to equality issues need to consider both direct and indirect discrimination. So factors that might influence one particular group that might not be direct, it might be an indirect impact. These also have to be considered. And in terms of libraries, how has this impacted? Well, the legislation can be utilised where bodies do not adequately perform equality impact assessment for new policies or procedures that they may introduce. And thus, library services need to be mindful of the Act and its potential power. For instance, in 2022, Nottingham Council and England were forced to apologise to campaigner Julie Bindell for cancelling a talk she was due to undertake in a local library, because they argued her views on transgender rights were at odds with their equality, diversity and inclusion policy. Now, the banning of the event was deemed unlawful and highlighted that organisations need to be careful in such cases to ensure that the rights of all citizens are considered. The Act reinforces the challenge that the rights of some groups may clash with the rights of others, and that resolving such clashes may not always be straightforward. Now, from a theoretical perspective, the emergence of critical librarianship has informed much of the reflections on how libraries can both exclude and include minorities in terms of their policies. Building on the wider critical theory movement, critical librarianship focuses on issues related to power structures and imbalances in society and how they impact on institutions and professions, and, as a result of this, wider society. For critical theorists, the critique is rooted in a shift in emphasis to aesthetic, textual, and quasi-political strategies, demonstrating a commitment to celebrating those who have been defined as the other by those with power. Pluralism has thus become a primary value, justifying movements to dismantle processes and hierarchies of power that have enabled the divisive selecting and sorting of people, thus creating the other. Thus, there is an emphasis on understanding the experiences of previously marginalised groups as a way of being much more inclusive. And this, certainly in the last 15 years or so, has been particularly influential on librarianship. An aspect of critical librarianship relates to the critique of neutrality. And we've defined neutrality in the previous video when we talked about ethical theories. But in terms of librarianship, it's been argued that neutrality has become a dirty word for many librarians committed to social justice. And that was a quote from Wensler. The term post-neutrality librarianship has been used to label the period we're now in, and McMenemy, myself, among others, has reflected on the increasing challenge to neutrality as an ethical stance for the profession, and considers what might replace it in the future in terms of values, suggesting a communitarian virtue approach may be a good fit. So that's one view among many, but really what's not contested is the issue that neutrality is something that is under significant critique. However, it is still a powerful tool if adapted to suit the circumstances. And this reflects what Alfino and Pearce present when they argue that while neutrality may require excluding one's personal convictions, it does not mean excluding one's knowledge, even though one hopes that there is a substantial overlap between the two. More recently, Scott and Saunders found that within the public library sector in the USA, conceptualizations of neutrality are more nuanced and can include non-partisanship or abstaining from giving opinions on political figures and striving for a balanced collection representing a diversity of viewpoints. They continue that, while most librarians seem to believe that they should not take sides or express opinions with regard to political figures, they seem more comfortable with taking positions on scientific issues, such as climate change, or social issues such as police brutality and hate groups in their meeting spaces. Nevertheless, there is a strong argument from both within the profession and without that we are either in or approaching a post-neutrality world with regards to ethical stances in society, and if so, we must expend much more effort in shaping what that world will look like. There is arguably a significant vacuum on this debate at the moment, and that's troubling. It does happen in pockets of the profession, but it's not yet a mainstream and all-encompassing conversation that is engaging the entire profession, and even more importantly, arguably, our engagement with users. Now, on the topic of sustainability, on their face, libraries are good for the environment. They provide access to resources that are shared, meaning less waste. Libraries are also well placed to help to inform the public about sustainability and environmental issues more broadly, regardless of the sector. But what exactly do we mean by sustainability, and why is it something that is of ethical concern for libraries? Henk suggests that sustainability is built on the idea of intra- and intergenerational justice, the notion that those currently living have an obligation to themselves and to future people to ensure everyone has equal opportunities in life. Aldrich argues that a shift for librarians to one of sustainable thinking is a crucial element in libraries addressing the issues, and she also argues that this is values-based. To quote, "Sustainable thinking refers to the alignment of a library's core values and resources, which can mean staff time and energy, facilities, collections and technology, with the local and global community's right to endure, bounce back from disruption, and thrive by bringing new and energetic life to fruition through choices made in all areas of library operations and outreach. This definition is a call to action for libraries of all types to think differently, with intent, about everything that we do." Now, the emphasis of libraries related to sustainability can be defined in terms of two important areas of focus. One, making libraries themselves more sustainable, and two, helping communities understand sustainability issues more fully. And clearly both of these are at their heart exercises in advocacy. One policy in the UK that we've seen grow over the past couple of years is the Green Libraries programme. In February 2022, CILIP launched this partnership in collaboration with Arts Council England, with the concept that public libraries are hubs of sustainability, reusing and recycling books and providing information to communities to underpin their own climate action is at the core of what we do. Now, the first Green Libraries conference took place in March of 2023, and in Scotland this initiative is built on via the Green Library Scotland grant funding, and this has funded a series of projects in Scottish libraries, including supporting public discourse around sustainability with workshops and events, as well as funding an environmentalist in residence in one library service. Now, as well as those positives, we also need to consider the negatives around libraries and sustainability. And Govinda Chowdhury rightly reminds us that digital information, a cornerstone of modern library provision, is a potential environmental issue. He says that digital libraries and information services make extensive use of ICT infrastructure and devices throughout the life cycle of information for creation or digitisation, management and preservation of content, and for accessing, using, downloading, printing and sharing content and data. ICT infrastructure and devices generate a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions, and thus contribute to the environmental costs of digital libraries and information services. Thus, libraries need to be mindful of their role as both advocates and venues for sustainability, and at the same time assess and try to ameliorate their role in environmental damage due to the use of technologies that utilise large amounts of power and impact the environment as a result. And Henk argues that we all have a role in this. Quote from the book, reimagining the ethos and practice of librarianship to ensure that sustainability is brought to the forefront is a monumental task, and it's one that we need to undertake as a group, with voices from across the profession. Voices from small libraries and large, rich libraries and poor, and experienced librarians and newcomers to the profession. So what is the kind of shift that needs to happen then? Well, the shift in thinking for libraries to a sustainable agenda should not be a challenging one, given it is something that the ethos of libraries is essentially built on. Initiatives like Green Libraries allow the profession to tap into advocacy efforts that blend local events with national promotion for a coherent programme. So Green Libraries programme and the like offer lots of resources that libraries can use, but in addition, Henk's work provides useful templates for sustainability plans, as well as a sustainability assessment worksheet to measure the sustainability readiness of our organisation, while Aldrich's book provides a range of resources including case studies and policy statements that may be useful. There are lots of resources out there for anyone who wishes to learn more about sustainability in libraries, and these are all useful resources that can help you build your knowledge around the concept, but also perhaps plan initiatives around it as well. Moving on to the topic of wellbeing. So promoting the wellbeing of citizens and communities is obviously a good thing for society, and it might seem strange to raise it as a potential issue of controversy to be aware of. However, being aware of where critiques may come from and how to balance these is a useful reflective exercise. So the concept of wellbeing fits into the branch of behavioural economics known as nudge economics. And this began to emerge in the 1990s, and it was brought into the mainstream by Thaler and Sunstein's work, Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth and Happiness. And Sunstein was actually brought into the Obama government as a regulatory czar to help shape policy. Now, Thaler and Sunstein described the role of choice architects as people involved in delivering public policy or public services who could help shape the public and their choices. And to quote from Thaler and Sunstein, "A choice architect has a responsibility for organising the context in which people make decisions." Now, in doing so, Thaler and Sunstein were addressing the concept of state neutrality, as they perceived no choices in the design of policies to be neutral. They said there are many parallels between choice architecture and more traditional forms of architecture. A crucial parallel is that there is no such thing as a neutral design. So this goes back to our discussion earlier around library neutrality. Now, their thesis is that people's lives can be improved by subtle nudges made by policymakers, encouraging citizens to make choices that are better for them, for their lives and for their communities. Again, quoting directly from them, they say, "Small and apparently insignificant details can have major impacts on people's behaviour. A good rule of thumb is to assume that everything matters. In many cases, the power of these small details comes from focusing the attention of users in a particular direction." And they argue that since no coercion is involved, we think that some types of paternalism should be acceptable even to those who most embrace freedom of choice. Now you might ask, what are the ethical concerns here? Why should this draw criticism? Now, for the most part, it may not. However, if we reflect back to our discussion in previous videos related to the three categories of ethics, there are elements of one of those, freedom, that balk at any attempts to interfere with individual autonomy. Therefore, while nudging citizens to activities or policies that are ultimately good for them, that's clearly something that can be perceived positively. It's also possible that some in society may see such policies as paternalistic and not respectful of their individuality. Notably, however, Thaler and Sunstein see their ideas as a form of libertarian paternalism because the emphasis remains on personal choice. You guide people towards positive places, but leave them free to make that choice themselves. So in advocacy terms, the benefits of such initiatives are easy to be able to prove, but being mindful of any potential criticism is a good thing, as it may also provide the reflective elements that inform where the limits on such policy should be. For instance, Jones and Sallow cite the example of a university in the USA that encourages the use of Fitbit devices for new students, and that actually attaches academic grades to their use. From their paper, they say, arguing that measuring student movement is part and parcel of fulfilling the institution's mission of educating the mind as well as the body and spirit. Step and heart rate data from the Fitbits are automatically sent to the library management system and graded, but grades are lowered if they opt out. So again, this may seem acceptable, for some it may seem too far, but the idea of nudging people's behaviour to better influence their life is not necessarily a bad thing. But when it comes to libraries promoting different collections for well-being, etc., we just have to be mindful that that is a potential criticism that may be levied. Now, nudge economics have had a significant influence on policy in the UK, and as I said, knowing where the line is to be drawn can be challenging to measure. David Cameron's government, for instance, had a nudge unit as part of his team at Number 10 Downing Street. But we can also see the nudge economics in many public policy programmes, including those focused on well-being. Again, your approach to these may well vary based on your own ethical approach, but they remain potentially useful as policies, even when we must be mindful not to take them too far. So just summarising then, we've considered some of the impact of equality, diversity and inclusion initiatives on libraries. We've considered the challenges to neutrality in libraries and the issue this poses. We've considered the importance of a focus on sustainability for libraries. And we've also considered the concept of behavioural economics and how this manifests in terms of the policy of wellbeing. In the next video, we will focus on the experiences of the Scottish Library workforce as it relates to ethical issues, and report the results from a survey conducted for this purpose.